Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Willowbrook. This small town, nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, appeared idyllic, a peaceful place where neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. But as night fell, a chilling secret lingered beneath its surface, waiting for the moment to be unearthed. On the evening of March 5, 1997, the tranquility of Willowbrook was shattered. The sound of sirens pierced the stillness, echoing through the narrow streets lined with colonial homes. A frantic call had emerged from the local convenience store, where the owner, Thomas Halloran, was found lifeless, sprawled behind the counter. His loyal dog, Buddy, whined beside him, confused and smeared with the remnants of chaos. Detective Sarah Mills, a seasoned investigator with a penchant for detail, arrived on the scene shortly after the emergency lights illuminated the store. Darkness enveloped the aisles, punctuated only by the harsh glow of police flashlights. As she stepped inside, the heavy scent of spilled coffee mingled with a metallic tang in the air. Reminder. Secure the perimeter, she instructed her team, eyes scanning the room for any evidence that might unravel the tragic event. A handwritten sign, slightly crumpled, hung partially torn in front of the register. It read, "Have a great day." An ironic farewell that lingered hauntingly as the clock ticked on. This was not just a murder. It was a fracture in the town's very foundation. As Detective Mills took a deep breath, she knew this case would define her career, dragging her through a web of secrets that lay masked behind laughter and community gatherings. The investigation had begun, and the shadow of a killer loomed ever closer. The victim. Thomas Halloran was a familiar face in Willowbrook, a town that boasted a population barely cresting 2,000. At 53, he had become synonymous with the neighborhood's beloved convenience store, Tom's Mart. With thinning silver hair and the kind of laugh that resonated like an old record, he was more than just an employee. He was a confidant to many and a silent witness to the tapestry of lives that unfolded around him. As Detective Mills surveyed the crime scene, memories of the man began to unfurl. Neighbors described him as generous, often lending groceries to those in need or offering a late-night chat for the lonely. To children, he was a fountain of stories, sharing countless adventures and tantalizing tales. He had been married to Mary, his high school sweetheart, for 30 years. Tragically, she had succumbed to cancer 2 years prior, leaving an unmistakable void in his otherwise vibrant life. Detective Mills arranged photographs of Thomas from various times in his life across a table. In each image, his easy smile shone against the backdrop of milestone Asa graduation, his wedding day holidays spent with family. Yet, as the coroner later confirmed, there was nothing easy about his final moments. The fatal wound, a single stab to the heart, was brutal, executed with sudden violence, far removed from his harmless day-to-day existence. A store clerk nearby recalled the evening of the murder with trembling lips. He was just himself, joking with the customers. Like always, he never saw it coming. Detective Mills carefully jotted down those words, sensing the resonance of betrayal in the voice. It was clear that among the familiar faces and friendly greetings, someone had harbored a darkness capable of unraveling the very fabric of their community. Each detail was vital, each recollection a thread in the tapestry of Thomas's life that would ultimately guide Mills towards understanding the motivations behind the unthinkable. One irrefutable truth lingered in the air. Someone had taken him from them, and the search for answers was only just beginning. The crime scene. The interior of Tom's Mart was illuminated by stark fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, creating an unsettling ambience amidst the chaos. Detective Mills stepped carefully around the blood-stained linoleum floor, avoiding the shards of broken glass that crunched beneath her feet. The efficient aisles that had once housed comforting snacks and everyday essentials now bore witness to a violent rupture of trust between community members. As her team meticulously documented the scene, Mills took note of the store's layout, instinctively piecing together the puzzle. The counter, where Thomas had spent countless hours ringing up customers, was a macabre focal point, smeared with an unsettling mixture of spilled soda and blood. Stacks of magazines were askew, a testament to the struggle that had erupted just moments before Thomas's life was extinguished. Nearby, an abandoned shopping bag spilled its contents, a pack of gum. A candy bar boat, it was what lay beneath the counter that captured Mills' attention. She crouched to examine a small, folded piece of paper. It looked out of place amidst the chaos, but its wrinkled edges hinted at something that had been hastily tucked away. Unfolding it, she revealed a receipt dated March 3. The name of a local supplier printed in faded ink. It led to a hunch, a potential lead that could extend beyond the confines of the store. As Mills continued her examination, her gaze flicked toward the back door. It was locked from the inside. Why would a killer choose the front entrance, risking exposure? There was no evident sign of forced entry, raising the chilling possibility that Thomas had known his attacker. Time slipped as she scrutinized every conceivable angle, investigating cash register anomalies and the surveillance footage. But what haunted her most was the absence of struggle on the thief's part. Who was bold enough to take a man's life in a place so seemingly safe? Just as her thoughts began to coalesce, a patrol officer approached, breathless. "Detective, we found something." His eyes held the promise of discovery, the pulse of adrenaline surging through them. Mills moved towards him, sensing they were propelling closer to understanding the darkness that had disrupted the heart of Willowbrook. The pieces were there, she felt it. It was a matter of time until they fit together. The early investigation. The following morning dawned cold and gray, a stark contrast to the warmth of shared coffee cups and small-town camaraderie that had enveloped Willowbrook just days before. Detective Mills gathered her team at the station, the mood heavy with determination. They reviewed their findings from Tom's Mart, the evidence still fresh in their minds. "Let's split up," Mills instructed, outlining their objectives. "I want interviews with close friends, regular customers, and anyone who might have interacted with Thomas recently. We need to understand his last days." The room buzzed with the swift clatter of pens against paper as the detectives prepared their inquiries, combing through witness lists and alibis that had begun to take form. Mills chose to visit Mary Collins, the elderly woman from next door, whose garden had always intermingled with Tom's Mart's parking lot. In her 80s, Mary was a fixture in the community, her weathered hands often busy with flower bloom. As Mills stepped through the wooden gate, she spotted Mary sweeping the porch, a natural smile folding across her face that quickly dimmed upon seeing Mills's serious expression. "Detective, what's happened?" "I heard about Tom," her voice trembled, knowing that this visit meant tragedy. Mills sat beside her, carefully replaying the details that awful night had revealed. She leaned forward, watching Mary's expression closely. Did Tom ever mention anyone unusual? Any threats? Behaviors that seemed... Mary bit her lip, her brow furrowing as she recalled moments from the past few weeks. He did talk about a strange man loitering near the store, someone who made him feel uneasy, but he brushed it off as mere paranoia. Gratitude washed over Mills as she scribbled down every morsel of information, her mind racing towards the implications. A strange man? That could indeed lead somewhere. Across town, another detective was interviewing regulars at a nearby diner, piecing together snippets of possibility that could lead them closer to finding Thomas's killer. At the same time, Mills turned her attention to the stores surrounding Tom's mart. Surveillance cameras routinely captured passerby activity, and with their own footage reviewed, they could uncover visitors who had increased their presence prior to the murder. The early investigation began to unfurl like a banner in the wind. Hunches and testimonies swirled, each thread drawing them deeper into a maze of community connection. While hope ebbed and flowed in the hearts of the townspeople, uncertainty loomed just beyond the horizon. Every moment brought a refusal to let the darkness rest, and Mills knew somehow they were getting closer to uncovering the shadow that had descended over Willowbrook. The dead ends. Days blurred into weeks as the investigation dragged on. Yet the small-town routine continued its oblivious march. Detective Mills, fueled by coffee and urgency, found herself increasingly entangled in a web of leads that seemed to fray rather than tighten. The town's camaraderie transitioned from hopeful to weary, and every turn brought waves of frustration, pooling into dead ends. Mills returned to the station one afternoon, muddy shoes tracking across the tiled floor. Agent Lopez, her partner, was perched at the desk, reviewing the timeline of interviews. His expression mirrored her own exhaustion, but softened into a hopeful glance as she approached. I spoke with several locals regarding that strange man, Mary mentioned. No one seems to know him, but they've confirmed they saw him, lurking around the produce section a couple of times, just before Tom was killed. That's good information, Mills replied, but the disappointment lingered. The trouble is, without a name or a description, we can't pinpoint anything. They sifted through addresses and names, desperately pulling together the scraps, yet each pursuit led them nowhere. A witness claimed to have seen a man in a dark hoodie leave the area, but those same witnesses couldn't agree on where he had gone left or right. Each lead seemed to vaporize under scrutiny, evaporating into mere speculation. Frustration etched lines on Mills' face when the topic of the surveillance footage resurfaced during a meeting. Has anyone reviewed the tape from the day of the murder in its entirety? She asked, hoping to unravel an error they may have overlooked. It was then that Officer Klein entered, breathless. Detective, I checked the cameras again from the back alley, he said, glancing nervously at the gathered team. They were a bust. The angles were all wrong on the day of the murder, but we did catch something strange footage from the night before. Someone showed up briefly. It's fuzzy, but show me, Mills ordered, her heartbeat quickening. The dim footage played, capturing a figure standing silently behind the store. As the frames flickered by, it became clear that they were left with more questions than answers. The figure slipped into the shadows, entirely unrecognizable. but their presence became an ominous specter hanging over the investigation. As the team groaned in resignation, acknowledging the trail that turned cold, uncertainty wrapped tighter around Mills. They were no closer to justice for Thomas Halloran, and with every dead end, the weight of the community's grief sank deeper into her chest. Clarity seemed further away than ever, but she refused to let it shatter her resolve. Embers of determination still glowed within the truth, lingered out there, waiting to be ignited. A break in the case. Just as hope began to dim in the tight-knit community of Willowbrook, the faintest glimmer flickered on the horizon. It was an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon when one of the younger officers, fresh from the local police academy, noticed something unusual in the reports flooding his desk. "Detective Mills!" Officer Mason's voice cut through the static of muted conversations in the precinct. Mills turned. Curiosity piqued as he approached her desk, a thin file grasped in his hands. "I've been digging through old cases," he exclaimed, barely able to contain his excitement. We had a break-in reported at a nearby garage about a week before Thomas was killed. I know it seems like it could be nothing, but check this out." With a furrowed brow, Mills accepted the file, scanning the police notes and witness accounts. As she read, her heart quickened. The garage had been broken into multiple times, and the adjoining businesses reported similar theft items going missing without any apparent connection, until the investigator noted a suspicious figure. A man fitting the description that Mary had provided. "What did the witnesses say?" Mills asked, her pulse racing. "Strange behavior, no." Pacing, muttering to himself. Even mentioned seeing him trying to sell lawn equipment. Thought he might just be desperate enough to kill, Mills murmured, the pieces shifting into focus. This was no mere stranger lurking at Tom's Mart. This was a man who was spiraling downward, whose presence now tied late-night thefts to the very heart of the murder investigation. Mills quickly gathered her team, charging them to revisit the witnesses at the garage and any potential video footage from the flea market. As they pored over the details, a sketch artist was summoned to help provide a clearer image of the frantic man who had hovered like a shadow over the quaint neighborhood. The energy in the precinct shifted, undertones of cautious optimism beginning to replace shadows of despair. Mills felt the familiar weight of determination settle on her shoulder. Finally, with a target emerging from the fog, they could seize the momentum. Later that evening, Mills stared down the dimly lit streets of Willowbrook from her office window. The subsequent rattle of chatter filling the precinct with purpose was a welcome reprieve. The investigation had begun to morph once again, and this time, there was no turning back. Each decision, each moment of hesitation would have consequence after all. They were no longer searching in the dark. They were closing in on the light. The suspect. The sun had barely risen when Detective Mills gathered her team for a briefing on their latest lead. The sketch of their suspect, drawn from the recollections of witnesses both at the garage and around the flea market, showcased a disheveled man with wild hair and vacant eyes, a tangible reflection of someone lost, teetering on the edge. "Everyone meet Andrew Andy Flex," Mills said, pinning the sketch to the board, the image stark against the beige paint. "He's had a few run-ins with the lawmen charges. Theft, trespass. But after looking through his records, it appears he's been living in a local halfway house since his last release." Her voice echoed softly around the room as she shared details about Andy's life, a grim narrative of missed opportunities and unfulfilled promises. He had grown up in Willowbrook, born into a family rife with struggles that had led him down a dark path of addiction and isolation. We think he might be connected to the break-ins and could be our link to Thomas's murder. The detectives split into smaller teams, determined to locate Andy. Mills felt adrenaline surge. This was the moment they had been preparing for. They needed to act fast. They covered all angles, canvassing the town for any sign of him while scanning footage from street cameras, desperate for a sighting that might tie him closer to the crime. Hours later, the call came. "Detective Mills?" A voice crackled over the radio. "We found him. He's at the halfway house down on Maple Street. We're moving in." With hearts pounding, they raced towards their destination, fear and excitement tangling in the air. Detective Mills understood what lay ahead. This could either lead to an arrest or spiral out into chaos. As they arrived, the building loomed ahead, with peeling paint and cracked windows that seemed all too fitting for a man who had battled his demons for years. After confirming identification and receiving permission from the halfway house staff, the officers began their search. Mills approached a small gathering of anxious residents, words whispering through the air like secrets. "We're looking for Andy Flex. Has anyone seen him?" No sooner had the question left her lips than a gaunt man stepped from the shadows of the doorway. His eyes darted nervously, betraying the haze of uncertainty clouding their illuminated gaze. "I'm here, what do you need?" he asked, his voice trembling. Mills felt the energy shift, crackling with unspoken tension. "We need to ask you a few questions about Tom's mart, Andy," she replied, maintaining a steady tone. "We believe you might have something to share." As she guided him toward a private room, she caught a glimpse of his demeanor. The inexplicable tension wrapped tightly around him like a noose. The air grew thick with unvoiced fears and swirling doubts. This was their chansa pivotal moment that could finally bridge the gap between horror and resolution. As the door clicked shut behind them, the storm of questions began, each one a careful step closer toward uncovering the truth behind Thomas Halloran's tragic end. The trial. Months passed since Andy Flex's arrest, yet the shadow of the crime loomed large over Willowbrook. The town, once a bastion of tranquility, now found itself on edge, gripped by anticipation for the upcoming trial. The proceedings were to commence in the old courthouse nestled at the town square, a structure steeped in history, where laughter and tears of the community had echoed through its halls for generations. On the morning of the trial, Detective Mills took her seat in the courtroom, the air electric with anxiety as spectators filled the wooden benches. She noted the familiar faces of community members, their expressions a mixture of resolve and sorrow. Thomas Halloran's widow, Mary, sat in the front row, her eyes wet with grief, searching for justice amid the wreckage of a life torn apart. The judge took his place, and the trial began with opening statements from the prosecutor. The district attorney detailed the heartbreaking narrative, recounting Thomas's final moments, his contributions to the community, and the brutal nature of his murder. Every word felt like a weighted stone dropped into the still waters of their lives. In stark contrast, the defense attorney rose, painting Andy Flex as a man grappling with mental health issues, a victim of his circumstances, rather than a villain lurking in the shadows. He lived life some may find hard to comprehend, the defense argued, but it does not make him a killer. Mill's heart sank as she listened. The tug of war over the narrative was exhausting. As the trial progressed, evidence was presented, testimonies from witnesses, including that of the officers who had apprehended Andy, all of it culminating in the pivotal moment when Detective Mills took the stand. Clad in a Navy suit, she recounted the painstaking investigation that had led them to the truth, the connections established with the community, and the portrait of a man fighting personal demons. Under scrutiny from the defense, she held her ground. "All I know is that we had enough evidence to suggest he was at Tom's Mart that night," Mills stated firmly. The forensic data and eyewitness accounts intertwined to form a clear picture of urgency. "I believe he acted out of desperation." The questioning shifted as she left the witness stand. Mills felt the gravity of her words settle over the court. The pain of Thomas's murder echoed through its corridors, palpable, waiting for resolution amid the collective breaths held by the audience. Finally, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom, faces inscrutable. The foreman stood, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged space. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Andy Flex, guilty of second-degree murder." A wave of muted emotion swept through the room. For Mary and the townsfolk, there was a flicker of relief. Yet the weight of loss still clung heavily in the air. The sentencing was to come, and they knew it could never replace the vibrant life that had been so cruelly extinguished. Mills exhaled slowly, a sense of accomplishment mingling with sorrow wrapping around her heart. They had brought a killer to justice, but the scars etched on Willowbrook's soul would take far longer to heal. As she stood to leave the courtroom, she glanced back at Mary, whose eyes filled with gratitude and grief, whispered silently of a resolution sought long before, but only recently found. The aftermath. In the weeks following the trial, the ebb and flow of daily life in Willowbrook resumed its rhythm, but the residue of loss lingered like a haunt among the townspeople. The initial relief of justice was tempered by an undeniable realization that nothing could erase the ache left by Thomas Halloran's absence. Detective Mills found herself reflecting on the case during her morning runs through the town she called home. The streets that once felt vibrant now seemed shadowed, each nod from friends and neighbors resonating with an unspoken understanding of what they had endured together. She was just as much a part of the community as the next person, carrying the weight of the investigation long after the final gavel had fallen. As spring crested and new blooms filled the parks, Mary Collins decided to honor her late husband's memory. She organized a small memorial service at Tom's Mart, inviting friends, family, and all who had felt the impact of his kindness. Detective Mills attended, standing under the gathering of cherry blossoms that dotted the parking lot with soft pink petals, creating a serene backdrop for moments of remembrance. Mary stood at the center, her voice steady but emotional as she spoke of the love and laughter Thomas had brought into the lives of so many. He made this town what it is, a place filled with warmth, where people cared for each other. She shared, tearing up at the memories of shared ice cream cones and late-night chats. The gathering turned into a celebration of life, with laughter mingling with tears. Mills found herself sharing stories about Thomas and how his light had made even a grim case more bearable. The conversations flowed like water stories, bouncing from one person to the next, reweaving the fabric of community that had been tugged at so violently. Despite the persistent heaviness that hung over the town, something powerful emerged from that day, a resolve to cherish one another, to foster connections that could resist the darkness that had cast a pall. Mills realized that, while the memory of that fateful night could never be erased, the legacy of love and kindness left behind by Thomas Halloran could be carried forward. She vowed to promote outreach initiatives, working alongside citizens to strengthen community ties in ways that would honor his spirit. As spring melted into summer, the shadows began to lift gently, revealing a community that had learned to cope with its grief. Mills rotated through routine duties, but the case remained etched in her mind, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the profound strength found in the bonds of a caring community. Willowbrook had cracked under the weight of an unspeakable crime, but from those fissures tendrils of hope began to sprout. The scars would remain, but amidst the aching sorrow, the people of Willowbrook began to bloom anew, fueled by resolve, connection, and a shared commitment to preserving the love that Thomas had once generously gifted them all. Reflection. As the sun set over the rolling hills of Willowbrook, Detective Mills found herself sitting on a weathered park bench. The wooden slats warmed beneath her as the shadows began to stretch. The tendrils of time always felt slower here, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that had engulfed her life for months. She gazed out at the playground where laughter echoed, children darting about, precious moments unfurling in carefree abandon. It was almost surreal to witness life pulsing undisturbed after everything that had transpired. Mills took in a deep breath, allowing the scent of fresh blossoms to fill her lungs, mingling with the bittersweet memories of their recent tragedy. The investigations, the courtroom drama, the gripping suspense, they had consumed her. But with the case resolved, a curtain had fallen on that chapter. It was not just about finding the killer. It had become a journey through grief, healing, and the reaffirmation of communal strength among seemingly mundane lives. In the weeks since the trial, Mills had come to appreciate the intricate webs of connection threading through Willowbrook. For every story of loss, there seemed to be a wellspring of hope surrounding it. The memorial service had transformed into a catalyst. Neighbors began reaching out, sharing meals, organizing community events to bridge the gaps that had grown in the wake of tragedy. As she reflected on their journey, she realized that passion for justice was inextricably linked to empathy for those left behind. While her heart and mind had been engaged in the mechanics of the investigation, the real victory lay in reforging the bonds of humanity, emphasizing love over despair. It was a lesson she knew she would carry with her, both as an investigator and as a member of this tightly woven community. With the twilight deepening, she stood up, brushing her hands against flax. She felt renewed, ready to embrace whatever challenges awaited her and to support those who still needed healing. As she began her walk home, Mills understood that the essence of justice was often found in the aftermathy resilience of a community willing to lift one another up, an unwavering belief that together they could navigate darkness towards the light.